We're sisters, best friends, and authors on a mission to help you stoke your creative fire and live the life of your dreams. We believe that purpose fuels passion and that creativity is your secret weapon for mass construction. There's never been a better time to bless the world with your dream realized. You're listening to The Kate and Abbie Show.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of The Kate and Abbie Show. We're thrilled to have you here. This is episode 31. And today we're talking about editing and when you might be editing too much of your work. You might be cutting out things that are actually good. Deep topic to get into. We want to give a shout out first off to our Patreons, to our patrons, our beautiful patrons, Angela, Sarah, and Rachel. Thank you so much for sponsoring this show, helping to make this possible, for being our wonderful patrons. We really appreciate it. If you want to become a Patreon, if you want to become a patron, check out our Patreon page. I always get those mixed up, one to say Patreon and one to say patron. I just call all of it Patreon.
Patrons are on Patreon.
Patrons are on Patreon. Okay.
Patreon.com/The Kate and Abbie Show. If you didn't say that already, I don't know if you did. Did you?
No, I just said to go to it.
Well, hopefully where will they know where to go?
Hopefully
How will they know where to
it.
go?
Hunt around and you should find it somewhere. So Patreon is the country and the citizens of that land are called patrons.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to talk about editing today.
Yes.
So how when you're going through your editing process, what are you looking for and how do you know when to cut something or not? Like, what's your process for that?
That's a big question.
It is.
There's a lot that goes into the editing process,
right.
Obviously. But, I think that the most important thing to think about is what you're trying to do. Your main objective here is improving the story. So what is going to improve the story or add to the story and make it better? So if that being the objective, I think you can approach it from a place of being aware of when you're maybe cutting out too much. When your objective is, I'm trying to make this better. I'm trying to add to it, add to the story. That might mean adding words. That might mean adding scenes or not taking out a scene that is technically unnecessary, but adds something.
Right.
So I feel like that's the distinction that we're going to be hammering home in this episode, is that just because something is technically not necessary doesn't mean that it shouldn't be there. It might actually add something to the story, even though the story could be digested and understood without that scene or without that thing that you're thinking of cutting.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a very good question to ask yourself. Not only does this progress the story, because I think that's a lot of what writers are asking themselves as they edit is this progressing the plot line? But you're right, there is another question, which is, does this add to the story? So you might not need it to tell the story that you're telling, but it might add to the story a great deal. It might make the story a lot better to have that scene in there. It might add to the story, like, emotionally. It might add to the character development. It might add to the internal conflict.
Right.
Which I think a lot of people see and we've seen this in television series and movies, when you get like a special edition of it where it's like, oh, here's all these deleted scenes, and you're like, oh, that so adds to that conflict or that side romance or that side character, and you actually feel more for the character. That's the stuff you actually want to leave in, because your fan base, your readers, love that. They love that extra bit to help them feel more for the characters. Then on the flip side of that coin, you'll sometimes see scenes that they don't do anything. And in fact, they kind of distract from the movie. And you're like, yeah, I can see why they cut that. So being able to distinguish between the two is really valuable.
Yeah. And in the past, I've done videos on editing, and I plan to do more videos, more in-depth on editing. But the thing that I always look for, just circling back to your original question, the thing that I always look for first and foremost is, for developmental stuff, I look for what what was my original plan with this story, with like the outline, what did I originally have in mind, and how does the finished product compare to that, or maybe not necessarily achieve what I wanted it to do. So that's like more of a vague, like overarching concept to question about your book. But as far as like line editing and stuff goes, I mean, you're looking for sentence structure that sounds weird, or minor plot holes, character voice, and then for really technical stuff, you're looking for grammar and passive voice and stuff like that. But with scenes that are unnecessary, I think it's important to ask yourself, looking at this scene, like, with this scene, does the whole picture change a little bit? You know? Like, I think that's a good way to determine whether or not it adds something. Because some people might be listening to this and be like, well, how do I know if it adds something?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, how would you describe figuring out whether or not it actually adds to the big picture or not?
I think that a valuable way can be to ask a beta reader. If you have a few really good beta readers that you really trust their opinion and you've seen their work, what they've done for you in the past with reading, and you're like, yeah, I really trust their opinion, ask them and have them read side-by-side versions. Put the scene in and then maybe not even ask them, maybe just see if they're like, oh, I loved that. Or if they don't say anything, then ask them like, hey, what did you think of that part? And see if they're like, oh, I thought that really added to it. I liked that part. Or if they're like, you could actually cut that out because it really didn't do anything for me. A good beta reader will tell you.
Right.
A good editor will also tell you. I've had my editor say many times, like, this whole part feels like it drifts off from what you're actually trying to say here. There's also been other times when my editor will pop a little blank space in and be like, hey, I would actually like a little bit more here if you could write something and add something to that scene if you think that's appropriate. So if you have someone that you really trust their opinion on your book and they want to help you get your book off the ground, ask them and get their take on it. Get a couple people's take on it. And that should really help you because you're so close to this book. You work on it every day. You've probably read it multiple times. Like you went through that with 100 Days. Like how many times did you read that book?
I don't know, man. Probably at least 50.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I thought I was guessing like 20. That's insane.
No, it was definitely more than 20. Because
Wow.
I went through this stage of like figuring out, I was trying to figure out like how many hyphens were in the book and if there were any weird hyphens that weren't supposed to be there. And instead of like just finding and replacing them in Word, I actually read the whole book.
Wow, that's intense.
In each edition. So the paperback, the hardcover, because the trim size was different.
Oh my gosh.
And the
crazy.
ebook. And I don't know why I did it that way. It's like the hardest possible way to do it. So yeah.
After you did that and then you figured out there was actually like a find replace thing where you like
there was like, oh, well, I knew that there was a way to find the hyphens, but I thought it would take forever to do that.
Right.
I don't know why I thought it would take longer
how many things could you possibly
to do that
be
than to read it.
hyphenating? In what is it, like 80-something thousand words?
Yeah.
How many hyphens could you
it's for the
possibly be
page
using?
break. It's for
Right.
the formatting, the page break. I put them all in manually, and then I changed some of
Still,
the sizes.
like I feel like it would take less time than reading
no,
it
will.
three times.
And it does. And then I did it that way, and I'm like, okay.
Dang.
This is much faster. It took me like 30 minutes to get through the whole book instead of like, 3 hours.
Oh, 3 hours. Wow, you
Now,
read
if I was
so
like,
fast.
Well, if I was just like reading it through, I could read it.
Like I've seen people who have said to you like, oh, I sat down and read your book in like 2 hours. And I'm like, how? I've had readers who have told me that they read my book in like a day or a few hours. And I'm like, how do you do that? I struggle to read it in like a week when I have a deadline and it's like, oh, I have to read this thing. And it's like so hard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really read fast when I'm reading for my own pleasure. Mm-hmm. I like to read slow. I kind of have like two reading speeds.
You seem to read rather quickly though, based on how I see you get through a book. Like it's fast compared to me, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not fast in this grand scheme of how fast people read.
Probably not. I think I read pretty slowly compared to a lot of people I see, but I think it's good to just read at whatever pace you like.
Yeah, definitely.
But we're getting off topic. Back to editing.
Reeling it back in. So you're really close to your book. you're really close to it, and it's good to have someone who's not that close to it read it and be like, hey, that doesn't do anything for me, and this does. And I think it's important to like I touched on this a little bit, to try not to ask them point blank, because sometimes that makes people's minds start asking questions that weren't going to organically occur to them. Sometimes for a scene, you want to just see what their reaction is organically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not be like, oh, did you think that this part where, you know, this person rushes in and says this, and then this fight ensues, was that dragged out? And then they're thinking like, oh.
Yeah, it's like a yes or no question.
And then they think about it in this isolated sense, where you really want them to think about it more within the grand scheme of the whole piece.
Yeah, like you're asking them a question that's only really bringing you a yes or no answer.
Right.
So you don't really want to do that, I don't think, with getting feedback, because you want to get feedback. You want to get as much as you can. You want them to talk as much as they can about it.
Exactly.
So you want to ask a question that brings out some of their thoughts, not just like, yeah, no,
it was all right.
That's not helpful.
Not the best advice. No. That's not going to help you out a lot.
So it's better to ask them a question like, you know, what did you think of this scene? Like, how did you feel when this happened?
Yeah. Or what was your favorite part of this scene? Did you have a least favorite part of this scene? Questions like that are like, I feel provide better feedback.
Right.
Than just like, was this too slow? Was the pacing off? Did that happen too quick?
Exactly.
And that way you're giving yourself actually more information to go off of than just, no.
Exactly.
You know?
And by the way, if you're looking for beta readers and you're like, where do I find beta readers? I don't know how to find beta readers. A great resource to find beta readers and just connect with a lot of awesome writers is our Start Your Story Challenge Facebook group, which we talked about a lot back in like March, I think, is when we started it. But it's still going strong, and there's a bunch of writers in there always hanging out, talking about story together and helping each other. It's a really awesome community, and you can find some beta readers or critique partners there. Make some new friends, so definitely check that out. We'll link it below, but I believe it's facebook.com/groups.
/Start Your Story Challenge.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
so check that out.
I was just in there this morning, and it's so cool
to
see people. Hey, you know, I need some advice about an editor. Hey, you know, this is what I'm thinking of for a blurb. What do you guys think? How would you go about it? It's like great.
It's a great little
place
community
to bounce ideas off each other,
for sure.
So I think that beta readers are a great way to get feedback on whether or not you should take something out. Another way is to just distance yourself from it a little bit, like give it a break. We always talk about letting your novel age a little bit, giving yourself some space, and then going back and look at it with like new eyes and be like, sometimes it will just click and be like, oh yeah, that's good. That works. Or you'll be like, oh, you know what? Now that I'm like not so up in its face and enamored with it, I can see that does have some issues, because we can do that too. We can get really enamored with a thing that we're obsessed with. And even if our beta readers are like, you know, that one thing that we really want,
your darling,
our darling. And people are like, why is it here? And you're like, don't talk about it that way. How dare you? And then, but if you back off from it a little while, then you're like, oh, I can see what people mean.
You got a point.
You can look at it objectively.
Right,
you know?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the whole thing about distancing yourself from your story. And it makes you a better editor, because then you can look at the big picture, you know, not just like, oh, this one piece, I was so proud of that sentence. Well, that sentence might work somewhere, but what I like to do is when I'm going through, if I come across a sentence or a paragraph that I'm like, that feels so out of place, I will take it and I'll save it in a document of like sentences I really like from this book. And later I'll just keep my eyes open for a place where I can put that later in the book, you know? So if like it's something that is unrelated to the events that were happening in the scene,
Right.
then I can save it and put it somewhere else.
Well, kind of
Usually.
like when you were reading me something, Abby was reading me her top secret work in progress last night, and like that, there was a line of dialogue that was great, but I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, it feels like that character wouldn't
Yes,
say
it
that.
was
And you're
the
like,
other
yeah,
character's voice.
but it was like so good. I'm like, you could totally use it for something
Right.
else. So stuff like that. But I think like we were talking about too, there's a time and place to kill, quote unquote, kill your darlings, like all these authors
Yes.
like to say. And then there's a time and place where you shouldn't. And
Yeah.
it's actually you're butchering your story.
You're like, oh,
And-
this isn't necessary. Cut. And then later it's like, actually, that would have added so much
Right.
to it. That would have added depth to their internal conflict, and it would have just added this other layer, and people would have loved it. And so it's not
Exactly.
necessarily always like the goal. I feel like this is the problem that a lot of writers have, is the goal is like, I have to cut words and make this like really clean and sharp and to the point. And that's not the case for everything.
Right.
You know, especially depending on the genre you're writing. Like, if it's like a fast-paced, really short, crime thriller or something, then you might not want to go off on this philosophical discussion with these characters about something that's not really related to the thing. It's the plot itself. But maybe, who knows? But if you're writing more of like, a thoughtful literary type of story where philosophical discussions kind of take a focal point in the narrative, then don't necessarily just chop that out because it might be unnecessary and it might not be needed.
Right. Exactly.
It's like it might actually add something to the narrative.
Right, for sure. Because like you said, it really depends on the genre and the style of your writing and what you're trying to say.
Right.
And you also have to think the golden question, which is why does it matter?
Yes, why does it matter?
And if it has meaning, then
Yeah, you can pretty much just
it's
ask yourself
accomplished
that
its function.
about everything.
Exactly.
Every sentence, every paragraph. Why does it matter?
And we were
if you can
talking
answer that question, then keep it.
right. And we were talking about this the other day, that good writing isn't so much like describing something in like long prose, or on the flip side of that coin, describing something in as few words as possible. So it's like as short and snappy and clean and tight. The best writing is really just saying exactly what the thing is in words that the reader's been longing to use to describe that thing all along.
Right.
And so it's like this feeling of satisfaction, like, oh, yes, that's what that thing is.
Precision.
Precision.
Precision
So-
of language
and
is
use-
like very impressive.
It is.
It doesn't
That's
have to
exactly
be
what it is.
flowery language or something that's like, a big, hard to pronounce word.
Right.
It can be even, very small, simple words that we encounter every day. But if they are precisely descriptive of what that thing is, that's really the most impressive thing, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And so that kind of shows us that the best path is not necessarily to just, unsheath our swords and hack our way through the overgrown woods of our writing until there is nothing left except a leveled field
Yeah.
and a couple little trees. You might not want to do that. That might not be the best path, because precision isn't about having as few words as possible.
Yeah.
It's about, are the words that I'm using meaningful, and
Yeah.
are they actually describing like exactly what I want to say?
Actually, that's a great analogy. Think of it like a gardener. Like a really experienced gardener will go into a piece of land that's overgrown with weeds and stuff and find what needs to go, precisely what needs to go, and precisely what needs more room to grow, and how to make that look beautiful. But they don't just go in with a bulldozer and level the whole thing. I mean, you've seen developers go in with bulldozers and level land, and it doesn't look too good.
Right.
Maybe they'll keep a few trees, but it's mostly just like dirt. And that's not very attractive, okay? It's going to take a long time to build that into something that is appealing. But if you go in with precision and you take your time and you just pay attention to what really needs to go, what can stay, and how do I just take little steps to make this better. And I think that that can be the most challenging of all. I mean, going into your novel, your story, whatever it is, your screenplay, and asking yourself, am I willing to put in the repetition of going through this over and over again and taking out, little things and oh, that comma shouldn't be there. Oh, this sounds better. Oh, if I reconstruct this sentence, you may have reconstructed it 5 times already.
Right.
And the 6th time, it's really good. And that's kind of why a work of art is never finished. It's just abandoned. But you can also just keep coming back to it if you have the perseverance and the love of your art, really, is what it is. It's kind of a labor of love.
Right. Because even though it's abandoned, you can abandon it when it's still just a pile of lumber waiting to be constructed. Or you can abandon it when it looks like it just was on the HGTV channel.
Exactly.
So you have to really put in the time and care. Mm-hmm. It is a labor of love.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. And you said something really revealing about it when you were using the gardener analogy, which is which things are you going to cut back so that other things can have room to grow. And that's one of the things that I think gets lost in translation a bit with editing, is that some things you're actually going to want to let them expand and don't feel like, oh, well, I can't just go on and on about that because I'm trying to cut words here. That's not what editing is. Editing isn't about cutting words. And sometimes you actually want to expound on a thing and let it flourish. Okay, cool. You have a beautiful thing going there. Let it really take on a full-bodied presence like it's meant to. I've had my editor say that so many times, oh, I love that. Keep that going. Cut some of this out and make more room for that.
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't want to just go through and hack a bunch of stuff out. That's not what makes good writing, and that's not even what makes writing tight. Cutting words and tightness in a novel are not synonymous.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you do have to make room for those other things and I'll also ask yourself what would add to this scene. If you don't know and you're just looking at the scene, you feel like this could use something. I don't know what, but it feels lacking. Just contemplating the question, what would add to this? What would improve this? And even asking your beta readers, like we were saying before. Ask your beta readers about it. Ask for input and advice and really take the time to think about what would improve this scene. I was just going to say something else. Now I can't remember what it was.
That's 100% true. We're constantly bouncing ideas off each other.
Yeah.
I'm stuck at this part. And sometimes you just need to talk it through.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's amazing.
You just need to talk it out.
It helps me so much.
Out loud. And
when I talk to you about something, it's just the answer was just sitting right in front of me and you help me to see it.
Right. And a lot of times the answer I give you is something that's already there in your book. And I'm like, oh, well, you already have that going on. So why don't you just have that, interject right there? And it's like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Obviously.
Right. And vice versa. That's happened to me so many times.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you remember your thought?
No, I didn't. I can't remember it. I hate that.
Yeah, that sucks.
It was something about editing. I don't know. But I think I wish I could remember it.
I know, it's going to bug me now.
It's going to bug me.
People are going to be down in the comments what was that thing?
It was probably
the most important thing. And now we missed it.
Oh, well. Maybe I'll remember it in the next episode.
Abby will have to make a video on her YouTube channel. The thing she remembered.
I remembered.
The brilliant thing about editing.
I remembered.
Yeah. So that's the thing is you have to remember that.
I'm trying to.
Hacking your way through your writing isn't necessarily what's going to make it tight. Giving yourself the time to go through your writing, like Abby was saying, again and again. Giving it.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Okay, thank you for reminding me.
Awesome. Yay!
I think I've talked about this before on my Instagram or something, but the tedious aspect of your art is really where greatness happens. And when you find yourself getting bored, that's probably a sign of this is becoming really great. Whatever you're producing, whatever you're doing.
That's such a
whatever
comforting
you're
thought.
practicing over and over again. If you're getting bored with it, it means that you've not only met the challenge, but you're continuing to persevere through the boredom, like the over and over again. Like when you see people who are masters at what they do, they had to do that over and over and over and over again and show up even when they were bored out of their mind. And like, I hate doing this. Like, how many Olympians do you think hate doing their sport that they are trying to go to the Olympics to do or have gone to the Olympics doing?
Right. It's so funny
Like,
you say
I
that,
don't
'cause
want to show up in practice today. I don't want to show up and train today. And that's what makes them Olympians.
Right.
Is they do anyway.
Exactly. That's so
You know?
cool. It's so funny. I was just about to say as an analogy, like, how bored do you think Nathan Chen is of quads?
So bored.
For those of you who don't watch figure skating, he's a figure skater, one of the best in the world.
Yeah.
And he does quads like nobody else. So you can bet he's bored of them.
Yeah.
So
oh my
that's
gosh.
you're right on when you master something. It's
mean,
not going to be like new and
yeah.
exciting every time. It's not going to be.
Exactly. And it's about those finessing those things.
Right.
Just like figure skating, just like any sport, just like writing. It's all about the finesse. So yeah, paying attention to that and paying attention to when you are cutting too much, and don't necessarily just go through and bulldoze your book for the sake of cutting words. It won't end well. Okay. I think that's the moral of the story.
Yeah, the moral of the story is don't just
Be
like
a gardener, not a bulldozer.
Yeah.
There's a tweetable. Everyone be like,
love
what are
that.
you talking about?
I love that. Be a
Yeah.
gardener, not a bulldozer.
Yeah.
You know? And it's not just about chopping out words. It's about what words make sense here and what words help me feel something and help me to accurately, precisely explain what is going on in a way that's satisfying and meaningful to the reader. So
Yeah.
that might even mean adding more words.
Exactly.
Keep that in mind. Sometimes gardeners have to plant seeds, not just pull weeds. So
That's great.
so you
There's
have
another
to,
tweetable.
Yep, you have to do a bit of both. We're just like nailing these gardener,
I know.
like, little haikus
Yeah,
here.
little gardening haikus about writing. Who knew?
Someone's gonna come and be like, actually, the construction of a haiku is that wasn't actually a haiku.
Was it 5 syllables, 7 syllables?
I actually
5
don't know.
syllables? I think it was. I don't know.
But you know what? Our haikus color outside the lines.
Yep.
They don't obey the rules. So we hope you guys got something out of this episode about editing. Let us know if you're working on editing a book, if you participated in NaNoWriMo, or are still writing your novel. Let us know. And
They're still writing.
yeah, still writing. See, I'm out of touch because I don't know what day it is. I barely know what month it is. I'm all over the place. So I've been writing a lot, but I'm not doing nano. I'm just writing at my own pace.
You've probably written more words than I have this month, though, which is
Really,
funny.
you've been writing a good bit.
Yeah, but I'm behind. Behind on my goal.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yep.
But the point is to enjoy yourself and have a good
Show
time.
up and have fun.
Show up and
That's
have
the
fun.
point.
So we hope you guys are doing that. And if you're heading into the editing process, let us know if you got something out of this. If you took any notes, were your favorite takeaways, and what would you add? What are some tips that you would give writers who are working through the editing process? Tell us below. We'd love to hear about it. If you would like to support the show, you can do so at
Patreon.com/The Kate and Abbie Show.
We so appreciate your support. As always, it means a ton when you like and subscribe and share. Check out Abby's YouTube channel.
YouTube.com/Abby Emmons.
And if you're listening to this somewhere else, you can find the video version of this podcast on youtube.com/KEmmons. Thank you guys so much for being here. And until the next episode, stay stoked.
And rock on.